Welcome to LinkedUp, Breaking Boundaries in Education, a podcast that focuses on what is happening in education today, connecting everyone to the movers and shakers that are breaking boundaries in the education arena.
Welcome to LinkedUp, Breaking Boundaries in Education. You know, Jerry, I always think of kindergarten teachers as the best teachers. I think their instructional best practices are what we all should be, is what we should model after, right? And part of what they do is lots and lots of kinesthetic learning. And so I was, my major was elementary education, but I ended up teaching middle school, but I still infused that movement through learning centers and different ways to just get them up and moving. I was a science teacher, so of course they're moving. Did you notice that also when you taught middle school, that kids learned better by moving?
Oh, I did, but I had language arts and social studies, so sometimes it was hard to integrate the movement into it. And so that's what makes today's guest so interesting. Julian Reed is going to talk to us about the science of movement and learning and maybe give us some good tips about how we can integrate that in, because I think a lot of teachers understand, especially our younger students, they want to move all the time. Now, high school kids, they're tired a lot, right? Maybe they need to move a little more. Yeah. But yeah, Julian, we're excited to have you here and tell us about the work that you do.
Well, I'm happy to be here as well. Thanks for the opportunity. So I am a professor of about 23 years now at Furman University in Greenville, South Carolina. And my area of research is studying the health impacts as well as the cognitive impacts of kids as they move. I actually early on in my career, I was focusing trying to get more physical activity in schools and focusing more on the physical health as a way to say, hey, how important it is. But as you know, as former teachers yourself, there's just not enough time to necessarily bring something in that is an addition to versus something that kind of blends and you kind of, for lack of a better phrase, kill two birds with one stone. And so my wife's a classroom teacher, and she mentioned, well, if you really want to get more movement in schools, you really got to find a way to integrate it so we don't lose any instruction time.
Yes.
And the reason for that is just obvious. But as I started studying this a lot more, 25, 30 years ago, learning is really the oldest form of movement. It's the first thing we do when we're born is we move. And then we have, you go back to Piaget and the sensory motor and pre-operational and concrete operational formulation and those stages. And you learn so much about brain development through the cues of kids moving that it just made a lot more sense to talk to administrators and teachers and say, actually, what you can do to not only improve behavior and improve the cognitive ability of your kids is teach with movement rather than just using movement as an add-on. And that really led me on this journey to studying the physiological effects of movement on learning and how movement improves brain health. And this really started in the field of gerontology, actually, in the 60s, the executive function hypothesis, which basically says that more blood that goes to that prefrontal cortex, which houses those executive functions, leads to greater problem solving, working memory, abstract thinking, and better behavior. And then it eventually translates, its way down through adults and children. And we now know that physical activity is a great training medium to push off dementia. You can actually use it with people with Alzheimer's. And it's just essential for overall health and well-being, but we don't give kids enough opportunities to move as they learn in school. And that's when the brain is really ripe for learning, right? That's when we have so much plasticity early on. We really should be making sure not only do we have more physical education, but we have physical activity throughout the school day. And so I study how simple movements, it's just not necessarily complex things, fundamental skills that kids should be learning by the time they're 8 can be infused with your curriculum. And the movements that the kids do really show the teacher if they're getting the concepts or not.
Yes. Oh, I love this concept. I
Mhm.
have to share with you just a quick story because you said it started with gerontology. I was en route to the airport and I was on one of those shuttles. And there was a lady on the bus that was 102 years old and she was very spry. I mean, she was picking up her luggage and moving 102. And I said, "What is the secret to your success?" And she said, "You got to get up out of the chair and move every day. I tell myself I have to move." And I think that's so true because we hear like sitting is the new smoking.
Mhm.
And we know how important this movement is. So I'm excited to hear how we can integrate it into what we're already doing.
Yeah, if you talk to most people who've lived in those blue zones or those areas where they live a lot longer, movement is the key. And they
Yes.
say that not only do you need to move to stress your muscles and stress your bones because that's how they grow, but movement also stimulates growth factors. And the most common growth factor that people talk about is brain-derived neurotrophic factor, often referred to as BDNF. And it got a lot of claim to fame by Dr. John Rady, who's a Harvard psychiatrist who wrote a best-selling book in 2008 called Spark. And then he went over and visited a school in Naperville, Illinois, that was performing extraordinarily well academically. And he found the reason they were performing so well is they were starting movement in the morning and continuing to move throughout the school day. And this was elementary, middle, and high school. But when you move, you have what we refer to as in the executive function hypothesis, as more blood goes to the brain, and not only brings oxygen, but it brings growth factors. And those growth factors help to stimulate more neurons and more synapses. And cognition is really, right, neurons communicating with one another, sending a neurotransmitter from one neuron to the other neuron. Well, if you eventually get to something called long-term potentiation, and not to get too much in neuroscience, but you get these neurons cooperatively working with one another, it leads to long-term cognitive benefits. And why are
Mm,
kids at school? They're at school to learn. So we're
right.
not saying, hey, you shouldn't be having best practices with teaching. We're saying use all the best practices and effective teaching that the research supports to enhance the learning beyond just traditional paper to pencil. And so by moving, you put content into context. So our platform, it's called the Walkabouts platform. I'll give you an example in a first grade lesson. If you were
Yeah.
teaching long and short vowel sounds, and we have a couple characters that take the kids on an adventure, but we have the kids reach up for a long vowel sound and squat down low for a short vowel sound. So right away, long vowel, right? You're reaching up,
Mhm.
short, you're squatting down. You get up to put that into a context. A teacher with a very quick, our lesson, the elementary pre-K to second are 7 to 10 minutes in length, and our third, fourth, fifth are about 3 minutes in length. But a teacher can get a 4 minute assessment. Okay, who gets the concept? Who doesn't get the concept? Who needs
Yeah.
remediation? So simply by just doing those movements. Now, if you do the whole walk about 7 to 10 minutes, you actually get quite a bit of movement. And the physical activity recommendation, we want kids to get at least 60 minutes a day, but at the very least, we want them to get 30 minutes. Well, you just almost got 10 minutes right there, but you didn't lose any instruction time because you introduced a concept in first grade that they should be learning anyway. So it's really kind of a win-win. And part of that executive function, which a lot of teachers get scared about, is, well, if I get my kids moving, there's no way I can get them to calm down. It's actually counterintuitive, but the worst thing you can do for a kid who's hyperactive is have them sit all day.
Right.
Part of the executive function is self-regulation, and movement helps to stimulate that. So by stimulating that, you're able to control your own behavior. So although it's people don't want to believe that, it is actually true that movement helps to stimulate that self-regulation and enables kids to focus as well. And we found that with even Walkabouts, two research universities looked at it, and they found the kids who use it had decrease in hyperactivity, increase in academic performance, and an increase in focus. So you kind of win there as well. And as you know, as teachers, one of the main reasons people leave education is behavior management.
Yeah.
And if you're
Yes.
behaving, if your kids are not behaving and you're struggling with that, teaching's not very fun. So it helps with that as well.
And
Oh
for
my God.
years, we held kids in from recess if they were misbehaving in the
Right,
classroom,
right.
which
Right.
we know now.
It is don't even get me started. It is the worst thing you can possibly do. And we fortunately have a policy in our school district that you can't do that, but teachers still do it because they
Yes,
say,
we do.
well, it's the only thing I can take away from them. And I said, you're taking away the one thing they like to do, but the one thing that's going to help you
Help you.
actually,
Yes,
because
yes.
the position statement on recess that came from the American Alliance on Health and Physical Education, which they now just call Shape America, which is easier because it's not a bunch of just letters, but it was, you use recess to recharge the student. It's unstructured play. Yes, they learn character education and things like that, but recess shouldn't end in elementary school. You should have recess in the business world. They do recess over in Japan. I mean, they move before the workday starts. They move during the day. And we often think, oh, recess, that's just a school thing. No, you need to break up your day to move. Anyways, the average American brain and human brain, but we'll just say the American brain because most of your audience is probably America, but maybe it's national too, is we have limited attention capacity. I teach motor learning, right? You can only focus on so much. You have to break that up. And a great way to break that up is saying, okay, well, let's find a different pedagogy and let's move a little bit as we are working on this context. So it's not like you have to teach everything with movement, but to sit all day, as you mentioned, sitting the new smoking, I actually taught that lesson today in my fundamentals of public health, is the worst thing you can do is be sedentary. And we have so much data now that people who sit in a car greater than 11 hours a week, their risk of premature death dramatically goes up. So you have to break up that sedentary living. And whether it's just standing even, I have a treadmill desk and a standing desk and I can go up and down. You actually burn more calories standing. You use more of your brain standing. So it doesn't have to be go out and run a mile, right? It could be like you talked about early on, Jerry, having your kids move station to station, change the environment, change the behavior, right? Perception is reality. So if you perceive something different in a different environment, that's learning as well.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't have to be, oh my God, how am I going to come up with this lesson? It could also be, say, we're going to change stations every 20 minutes. There's a guy at the Mayo Clinic and he started consulting with Walmart and Coca-Cola and things like that, getting more movement. He brought in a buzzer into their boardroom, said every 15 minutes, change your seat. Stand up. I mean, there doesn't have to be these really complex things. We sometimes make things harder than they need to be. And what our platform does is we really just wanted to provide teachers a few more lessons, because most teachers have 3 or 4 they can go to, but sometimes they want to do more than that. And we just said, okay, here's a few hundred ways to teach the things you're already teaching. And what is cool too is our system knows what state you're in. So it pulls in your state standards for math, language arts, social studies, and science. Cool. So if we're teaching that first grade one that I just mentioned, long and short vowel sounds, I'm in South Carolina. I'm going to get the correlates from South Carolina. Where are you guys right now?
I'm in Kansas.
You're in Kansas.
New Jersey.
Okay, you're going to get those states. So that way, if a principal goes, well, what are you doing there? Well, like, hey, let me show you. Not only am I getting these kids moving and they're putting into a context, I'm able to share with you, look at the standards I'm meeting. And if they're in pre-K, we also bring in the Head Start standards and the NACE standards. And a big part of that is, as you know, we're all about performance pedagogy and K through 12 education. You have to be able to show what the standards you were meeting, especially if there's some principals who are not necessarily used to teachers teaching with movement. We wanted to make sure that they are able to say, hey, this is not just movement for movement's sake. I am meeting the standards that these kids need to be learning anyways.
Well, so you talked about a primary grade.
Yeah.
Let's look at, and you mentioned stations, right? So students learning stations, I would say that would be, maybe upper elementary or middle.
We go from pre-K to 5th grade primarily. But what I tell people in middle school and high school is you can do different. Why do we have to learn in the classroom? Why can't we take our activity outside with middle school and high school? And I do this in my college class. I'm teaching a college class on the environment and health. And we put our phones away. We'll take one of our articles and we'll go walk outside as we're talking about that article, and I'll give questions that the students have to ask one another about the content, but we're moving as we do it. Just a little bit of movement, the heart rate goes up, right? The heart rate has to go up. Blood pressure has to go up. You have to get more blood and nutrients to your brain because you're now moving. So it doesn't always have to be just the content itself. It could be just changing the environment and getting up to move as you are learning this content. So, we started with elementary school, and I think because it lends itself well, of course. But I've actually been talking with some folks to get back into the gerontology space because we have some friends who their grandparents are in nursing homes and they're not moving as much. Right. And we could say, how could we get activities of daily living and bring in content that they need to stimulate their brain so they are not just sitting and they're moving to improve their cognitive acuity as well? Is because, as we know, if you don't keep the brain active, whether it's puzzle solving, or you often will tell people do crossword puzzles or do different things as you get older just to keep your brain active. But with that blood going to the prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus and continuing to bring those growth factors, you need the physical movement there as well.
Right. So great. So the K through 5, easy, you have, which I want to talk about your platform to embed movement into the lessons and the learning. Middle school and high school, learning stations, moving around, just to move in and learn in different locations, but then also moving outside.
Moving outside. I mean, time spent outside when you're a young kid is actually the greatest predictor of lifetime activity. You get a lot from outside, especially if it's sunny and sunlight and air, but you're also now in a different context and your body is using more oxygen because just to move a little bit, you have to breathe in more. If we sit here all day, the amount of oxygen our body needs is not very much. And I do, and I'm sure you guys do this too, but little simple things like I only go to the bathroom in my building on the second floor.
Right. I was upstairs.
I walk upstairs and, I go to the bathroom probably more frequently than others. So I'm always walking up the stairs, or you park your car a little bit farther away. Some simple things that
great adult tips. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they're not like rocket science, but those steps start to accumulate and you're at least getting more movement. The majority of Americans don't get more than 5,000 steps a day. And that's about 2.5 miles. Now, if you're sedentary, there's no way you can do 10 to 12,000 steps. But if we could get someone sedentary to go to 7,000 steps, not only they're improving their cardiovascular health, but they're going to be improving their brain health. And the company was really an extension of me doing teacher workshops. And I was doing workshops, training teachers how to teach with movement. I actually taught a class for 20 years at the university to pre-service teachers, classroom teachers, not PE teachers, how to teach with movement. And then they kept asking me for lessons. So then I wrote a book. And then I was involved in about other research design studies. And I wrote another book, but it was really, okay, how can I get more, movement into the classroom and helping teachers, teach what they're already teaching. And it just kind of expanded to, okay, gosh, they keep asking me for things. Maybe there's only one of me, and I was starting to have children. And I was like, well, and technology in the early 2000s was starting to come into classrooms. And I was like, oh, maybe there's a way to leverage some of these ideas so a teacher is able to teach what they already teach. And then I found out really early, we started hiring teachers because they're way more creative than I am on how to come up with these lessons. But, it's not that difficult to do if you just think a little bit about it. And we then just created the platform to say, some people might just need a turnkey sort of thing.
Right.
And so we raised a little bit of money, and now we have an ed tech company that, teachers and districts and folks can use. They're trying to integrate, more movement throughout the school day into the classroom.
Love it. Love it.
Platform is called Walkabout platform.
Yeah, it's called Walkabouts. Yeah. And if you put Walkabouts in, or the Walkabouts platform, you'll get to our website and you can play with it. We offer it a free trial. We want teachers to use it. I mean, I didn't go into education to start a business. I actually tried to start this as a nonprofit, but it was really hard to raise the money to build the platform. And what is really cool about the platform too is every time you play a walkabout, it changes. So you don't get the same content the next time. So kids can't memorize the answers. And we also have some paper to pencil. We call them walk sheets, where teachers can use to extend the lesson or give it beforehand. And so, your elementary school is where kids typically like to move. When they stop liking to move is when they enter middle school. A big reason for that is physiologically, boys and girls start developing. If you go back to your elementary years, you could probably identify one of your best friends, the opposite gender, right? And because developmentally in elementary school, especially early elementary, boys and girls physiologically are not that different. But as you get into middle school, things start to change and you start sweating and girls and boys don't necessarily want to participate together. And then movement just tends to go down, and it kind of goes down for the rest of our lives. And if you can find something you like to do, you're much more likely to do it forever. And when I was, I trained PE teachers at one point too, is I would say, hey, if you have kids who just want to walk, let them walk, but just give them an opportunity to say, hey, here's a pedometer. You got to get this many steps in the lesson, or you have this much time. I want you to do this much mileage. And those are much more things you do later on in life. Adults, only 4% of adults play any team sport. You usually do something by yourself or with one other person. You go to a gym, or you might play pickleball, you might play tennis. I mean, I ride my bike. I didn't ride my bike like a road bike when I was a young kid because I played team sports, but it's so much harder to play team sports now that we want to make sure kids enjoy the experience. Another reason we lose kids too is they didn't enjoy their physical education experience during elementary school, and it really kind of scarred them. And then they look at movement negatively often for the rest of their life. So what I would say is, not only do we want to make this fun, we need to bring more PE back as well, but we want to make sure that physical education is fun and kids can look back at that and with positivity. My wife is extraordinarily active. She worked out this morning, I think at 5 a.m., but she still can remember failing the flex arm hang in fitness testing in elementary school, and she's 50,
I feel that.
She's 51 years old. The fact that she's still remembering that tells you a little bit about something that we probably don't need to be doing as much. We need to be making sure kids are enjoying movement and then make them lifelong movers. And that's only going to help their cognitive health as well as their brain health and obviously their cardiovascular health.
Yeah. Yeah, make it
Julie,
part
I
of your
wanted-
role.
I wanted to share something I did as a principal, because you just validated what I did, because I loved this. I just wanted to connect with the kids more. And so before school, I would just have walk and talk. And I would just walk around the schoolyard, or if it was raining, we would walk around the gym, and anybody could walk with me and just talk. And then we'd try to collect clothespins every time we went around to see how far we were walking. And that was just a great way to spend some time with kids, a lot of kids that maybe no one wanted to spend time with, and visit with them. But yet also I was kind of doing it selfishly because I didn't have time.
Well, there
to
you
get
go.
in.
You just worked it into, I tell our
worked it in.
tutors to do
Yes.
the movements with the kids, and I call my thing a
Right.
walk and talk too. I mean, that is just a great way of getting to know kids you might not necessarily get to know, but to like your point,
Right.
well, I'm getting some movement in, they're
Right.
getting some movement in, and we can do that throughout the school day too. It doesn't have to be just before or after. Is the example I was giving, hey, if you're reading an article or a chapter in a book, go talk about it outside, but let's go do it walking.
Right.
That gentleman I mentioned at Mayo, he doesn't take any sitting meetings. All his meetings are walking.
I
And
like
his
that.
feeling is, hey, I can get this done and we're moving. And we know the brain is more aware when we're moving. And I think what I was getting back to before that I forgot was we want our teachers to be at the best of their ability every day. So
Right.
why would they do the things that we know are effective? So getting them moving as they teach their lessons or before the day even starts, because I don't know anyone in any job who doesn't want to do their best. So we
Right.
often, this can help the teachers like it helped you get your movement in, but it also can help the kids.
Love
Yes.
it. Earlier you mentioned the movement improving executive functions.
Yeah.
And you gave an example of how neurologically it does that for self-regulation. Can you talk about some of the other executive functions?
Yeah.
And
So, right. We have a whole host of them. So you have working memory capacity, you have problem setting, you have goal setting, monitoring, the goal, abstract thinking. And so those executive functions we know are in the prefrontal cortex. So when you move and move over time, the blood vessels evaginate that part of the brain. And as they go in, you have what's called sprouting. Just like you sprout capillaries when you get more physically fit, you not only have those capillaries in your brain that are sprouting, but you're also sprouting those neurons and those dendrites and those synapses because you're bringing these growth factors. And one of those growth factors is something called insulin growth factor. Well, we need insulin, right, to metabolize sugar that gives us energy. We have another growth factor, which is called VEGF. It's just called vasoendothelial growth factor. What does that mean? Our blood vessels, the lining is endothelium. So if you bring a growth factor in there, then that is leading to that capillary perfusion. And if more blood's going to more parts of the brain is more is functioning at a higher level. Just like when more blood goes to more of your muscles over time, you become more fit. So that's really what's happening. So the working memory, the abstract thinking, the problem solving, the goal setting, those are all things in the prefrontal cortex. We also have found some research that BDNF is also in the hippocampus. And the hippocampus is a really important structure for memory as well.
okay. And then, so you mentioned all of that happening. And is that just also you mentioned all of it working in collaboration and helps in that? I guess that's what you were describing as well.
Yeah,
Because,
yes, they're working together
yeah.
in terms of the different parts of the brain that are benefiting from that movement. I mean, if you go back historically for Homo sapien and Neanderthal and Homo erectus, I mean, we were hunters and gatherers, right? We were moving, and moving is part of our DNA. We've engineered that out of our lives. We need to bring it back in. And I always talk to my classes, the electric can opener. Was doing this that hard, right? Did we have to go, yeah, we need this electric one because it's going to make it so much more efficient. And I get productivity is important. I mean, our devices, right? The computing power in this is stronger than it was in the original IBM mainframe. But when you engineer things away, there are some things that you lose. And sedentariness has gone up tremendously. In the early 1900s, people were dying from chronic disease. They were dying from infectious disease. Now, we've made a lot of progress with, medicines and vaccinations and things like that. But now we have this chronic disease because we are much more sedentary.
And do you think technology's played a role in that?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we used to do a lot of manual labor. Now, we as a society have said, okay, we need to get more educated and we have a lot more white collar jobs. But if you look at what people did early on, I mentioned the infectious disease, they weren't getting the same cardiovascular disease that we have today because a big part of it is that we are so sedentary. One of the first studies that was ever done to understand this a little bit was by a guy named Dr. Jeremy Morris in England in the 1950s. He looked at bus drivers versus conductors. And then he looked at cardiovascular disease. And what he found was, well, the bus drivers at a higher rate, and stress played a role in that, but the bus driver sat all day. The conductor had to go up and down the stairs getting the ticket. And that was that physical activity. That was really some of the first empirical data. We always knew, right? Socrates and Plato, and we're always talking about a sound body, a sound mind, but it wasn't, you need empirical data. And then there was another landmark study at 1986 called the Harvard Alumni Study, when this gentleman named Dr. Ralph Paffenbarger studied alumni from Harvard over time. And he found that the people who expended about 2,000 calories a week tended to live considerably longer, in some cases 2 years longer. So we started getting some more empirical data. Ultimately, the explosion of the data really came about in the 2000s because we had this childhood obesity epidemic that really was making its way through in the 1990s, but then it got really bad. And so everyone's like, so what are we going to do? And ultimately, what resonates with decision makers like yourselves is, hey, if you go, we got to get these kids moving more. We got to get more PE. You as a principal or as someone, a superintendent goes, I agree with you. I don't have the money or the time. What if I tell you can improve their test scores? Oh, ears perk up. What? Wait, what'd you say? This can help my test scores? And in fairness to the administrator, that's how they're evaluated, right? And so that's when more information was coming out, more people were receptive to, oh, this can actually help us with our learning versus just helping our overall physical health.
Right.
Yeah.
So important.
Yeah. I mean, this is fascinating. It really is. I mean, it's also common sense.
Right?
Right?
It's not rocket science. It really is. I mean, just if you have kids or grandkids, look what they do when they're so happy when they're young. They're running around, they're moving around, right? And then they get in the classroom. And I get we need to sit down and things like that. But we now have them in a time frame where the majority of their time is you come in, you bring your backpack in, and you sit down.
Yes.
And then we say, okay, now you're out of high school, you're going to go to college, and now find something you like to do. Go, you got to start moving. And we're like, well, you didn't want me to move most of the time during, 8 a.m. and 2:30, 3 p.m. Why do we do that? We shouldn't be doing that. Right.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
And also it just carries through. If you're doing it naturally and consistently in your childhood, then it's going to carry through as a lifelong
100%. Patterns start early. You can't remember the first time you brushed your teeth, but your parents showed you how to brush your teeth, and you brush your teeth, and they modeled good behavior. That's why parents who are active, kids are typically active. Parents who eat well and put healthy foods out, kids typically eat well because they don't have any other choices and they're hungry, and then they learn to like the foods that they're eating. You start those patterns early. Changing behavior is the hardest thing to do. That's why the number one New Year's resolution, right, is to get healthier and lose weight. Those fail by mid-January. Almost all of them fail by early February because behavior change is hard. But if you start it early enough, it's not cognitive behavioral anymore. It just becomes behavioral. It just becomes part of who you are. So getting back all the way, Jerry, to the woman who is 102, I can almost guarantee she's been moving at least those 100 years she can remember she was moving. Maybe she started remembering it when she was 4 or 5, but she was probably even moving even before that. I don't know any parent when their kid learned how to walk for the first time, they said, stop walking, sit down.
Right.
I want you to go back to just sitting. Now, granted, it did get harder, right? As parents are like, oh my goodness, before I could just have them there and they would move. But we all were excited for them to move, right? We were like, yes, come walk to us. And it was, oh, you walk. And then roughly 7, 8 months later, you start running. And we're excited about that. And then we're suddenly like, oh no, sedentary. Don't do anything.
Yeah.
So what advice do you give to people that are wanting to move from being so sedentary all day, that maybe are at their desk and on
Yeah,
Zoom?
I would say start small, right? I mean, the worst thing to do is to say, okay, I'm going to go run my neighborhood 5K this weekend. But if you're, instead of going to lunch, sitting down, go somewhere near and walk to lunch, right? Or take a lunch and go somewhere, go to a park. We now know just seeing green space is healthier for you. But just try to park a little bit farther away, right? Try to take the stairs and tell them the elevator. And that's how the CDC did a study at their own building, trying to get more stair use than the elevator. So they ended up painting the elevator and putting music in the elevator, and then putting art in the elevator and putting signs at the elevator saying free gym, 1 door over, right? So there's some little things you can do. When you get home, it's very easy to be really tired, but go take a walk around the block. If you have an animal, walk dog. People who have dogs are much healthier than people who don't. Part of the reason is because they a good pet owner usually walks their dog. So it doesn't have to be suddenly, oh my gosh, now he's telling me I gotta, go join a jogging club. That's not what I'm saying. Is you start and you just start moving a little bit at a time. And then eventually you build up those patterns just like anything else. When we're teaching our kids to read, you need reading endurance. You can't learn how to read and then go read 4 books, right? That's exhausting. We got to follow kind of those same things because it's really easy to get discouraged especially in movement, is saying, oh, you're sedentary, let's get up and go run a mile with me. Man, if you're sedentary, you can barely walk a mile.
Right.
So you need to start with just some simple things. And then as you get more confident, self-efficacy is one of the greatest predictors of movement. You get more confident in your ability. And then social support. The other thing I would say, and this is more with women than men, but find someone to do it with. One is it holds you accountable. So if you have a teacher friend, say, you know what, 3 days a week, we're gonna walk after lunch. And there are gonna be days they're not gonna want to do it, but they're gonna say, oh God, they're counting on me, so I'm gonna go do it. Social support is a great way to get accountability.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, the walking, the standing desk, of course, just getting up and moving for a couple minutes, even 10 minutes after eating. But I also, if you're sedentary, then you're at 0. So anything,
and that's 100% is, and the greatest health benefits come from sedentary, just starting to do something.
Yes.
Just something.
Absolutely.
And you will feel that not only you eventually feel better, your mind is more aware. And there's a charter school I work with here, and we required our teachers to work out 3 days a week. And we had a fitness center, but then we allowed them to go off campus because if they're healthy, they're going to have more energy. And when teaching is a hard job, right?
Yes.
You're given, I always tell my wife, I'm doing 3 shows a day, right? I mean, I'm tired, right? Yes. And she's like, yeah, again, I'm doing it all day. You're only doing 3 shows. I got these kids from 8 to 3. So
for you.
It's exhausting, right? And so you need to build up endurance. Well, being physically active is going to make you healthier. And most people who say they're healthy have more energy.
The technology has really made a big difference negatively in our cardiovascular health because we're sitting in front of the computer. But when you can, stand or listen, Jerry and I talk all the time about let's do our meetings and walk. I always say, let's try to do that because now we can leverage technology in a positive way. You have AI tools that can do note taking.
100%.
And so that way you can just go off and walk and all of the notes are being taken for you. And you're more creative when you're moving.
All my best ideas come after or during a workout.
Yes.
Well, it makes sense when you start understanding the physiology behind it. So why don't we leverage more of that in the K through 12 space?
Right.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm going to make my desk stand after we get off.
There
this.
you go.
Yeah.
You go.
I'm standing now. I own my podcast.
I know you're good at it. So,
but
this has been really inspiring.
Well, great. I'm glad. I really enjoyed talking with you too.
Yeah.
Well, we'll share your Walkabout platform in the show notes. But this is, and hopefully anyone listening, or we should probably put this in the beginning, or watching, get up and listen as you are.
Yes.
Podcast.
Well, you know what? There is a company out there called the Walking Classroom, and it's higher grades than us, but they do some great things. I know the woman who founded it, and they put a lot of content, and then the kids just walk during the school day.
So great. So great. Well, now we know why it's so important and what all the benefits are. So the more we can do it, the better. And it is more important now than ever. So
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. Wonderful.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was great.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. And if you would like to stay linked up, be sure to follow us on Apple and Spotify and subscribe to us on YouTube.